Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vitorian, and this is the 25th hour helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. Now in this week's news for the week of May 2nd to 8th, 2021, de Blasio wants to give tourists vaccines to get the city back on its feet. Cuomo tries preempting the city's July 1st reopening plans with early reopening ideas of his own. Biden travels around the country promoting his infrastructure plan while the economy slows down since workers aren't flocking back to work under pre-pandemic rules, and House Republican leaders are ousting one of their own for refusing to spread Trump's lie that he actually won the 2020 presidential election. Now on to the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with de Blasio. As part of the governor's daily briefings, Cuomo revealed that 3 million city residents are fully vaccinated, with around 4.2 million residents getting at least one shot. Data shows a slowdown of vaccinations in the city, however, with first dose vaccine rates decreasing by 2/3. Asian Americans have the highest vaccination rate in the city, with 68% having at least one dose. The mutation that ravaged the city and briefly raised the infection rate doesn't seem to be really hitting the city hard now, not showing up in the most severe cases or appearing in reinfections, according to a preliminary study by the CDC. 80,000 city office workers finally returned to the office, at least in a phased-in fashion at the start of this week. A lot didn't return happily, however, with hundreds of workers protesting outside City Hall on Sunday to demonstrate against the decision. Only 39% of the NYPD have received COVID shots, underscoring the challenge for getting the city's own police force to get shots, but is not far off from how other police departments or even how other frontline workers are vaccinated, with 52% of healthcare workers vaccinated between February 11th and March 7th. Departments from other states are also seeing similar rates of their officers not getting inoculated. Women and minority-owned businesses were more likely to have to lay off their workers, largely mirroring the experience of minority workers who were fired at the outset of the pandemic, reports the Daily News, relying on a city comptroller survey of 503 MWBE business owners. Governor Cuomo made the announcement that Broadway would start selling tickets already for sold-out shows in September. De Blasio also commented on Cuomo's plan to reopen New York City even before de Blasio said it would, saying that of course the governor didn't consult with the mayor about his plan. The two men have been political rivals since de Blasio became mayor, undercutting each other to New Yorkers' dismay. The city only approved 13% of requests from those asking for financial assistance to bury their friends and family members who died from COVID after the federal government sent funds for such requests a couple of weeks ago. Human Resources Administration Assistant Commissioner Natasha Godby told the City Council hearing that a vast majority in the program have missing paperwork or decided not to move forward with the program. The city is also asking the state for approval to give tourists shots of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in an effort to incentivize tourists to come back to New York City.
This summer, you're going to see tourism come alive again in New York City. You're going to see a lot of jobs come back because of it. We want to go the extra mile, make it easy for tourists. If they're here, get vaccinated while you're here. It makes sense to put mobile vaccination sites where the tourists are. That is good for all of us that they get vaccinated. It's good for them. It's another reason to be here and know you're going to be taken care of. So we're going to be setting up these mobile vaccination sites where tourists go. We'll be using the J&J vaccine. We'll be in Times Square, Brooklyn Bridge Park, Central Park, the High Line, a variety of locations. And we're going to be working with the state of New York. We need the state to alter the rule that will allow us to provide vaccination to folks from out of town. But we think this is a positive message to tourists. Come here, it's safe, it's a great place to be, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you get vaccinated while you're here with us. So this is going to start as soon as we get that approval. We're ready to go this weekend. We want to welcome more and more people into the vaccination effort.
Over at the 39th Street Pier in Brooklyn, refrigerated trucks holding the bodies of 750 COVID victims still remain idle, and the city doesn't have a specific time frame for when they're moving the trucks or the cadavers. Deputy Commissioner with the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, Dina Maniotis, said that the city will let families of their loved ones know when the bodies are moving out, with families saying they want the bodies buried at Hart Island, where many unclaimed bodies that perish from COVID went, but other families have stopped engaging with the city altogether. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams leads the pack for the first time, according to a poll from GQR. 21% of 500 likely Democratic voters chose Adams as their next mayor, with Yang at 18% and Stringer at 15%. The poll was conducted in the midst of Stringer's sex assault allegations. Yang is spreading around the results of an internal poll showing him as the frontrunner based on traditional results, but according to the ranked choice simulations, the news organization The City points out that Eric Adams and Scott Stringer, polling at 2 and 3, have a shot at winning on the ranked choice voting rules based on historical trends. The number 2 in the race, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, won an endorsement from New Queens Borough President Donovan Richards this week, joining Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr.'s approval for Adams. Adams was also endorsed by Abner Luima, who famously was the victim of a police brutality incident in 1997 when an officer sodomized him with a police baton, and the father of Sean Bell, a black man gunned down by undercover NYPD in 2006, the day before his wedding, in an effort to refute activists concerned about Adams' police past. Two assembly members, Michael Benedetto and Charles Fall, endorsed Sean Donovan, heralding his experience. Donovan was Obama's HUD secretary. Andrew Yang was endorsed by National Asian American and Pacific Islander advocacy group AAPI Victory Fund, as well as Jewish lawmakers Councilman Kalman Yeager and Assemblyman Simcha Eisenstein, continuing to win endorsements from the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. Diane Morales was endorsed by the Jim Owls Liberal Democratic Fund, one of the leading LGBTQ Democratic clubs in the city. Four mayoral candidates, Stringer, Wiley, Morales, and Paperboy Prince, who you may not have heard a lot about, signed onto a pledge to regulate Amazon's growing presence in the city, which, despite the high-profile denial to build a new headquarters in Long Island City, actually owns a lot of property and employs a lot of people around New York City. The New York Times came out with a report this week profiling Yang's nonprofit Venture for America, which had the mission of hiring 100,000 people, but only ended up with 150 people working in various cities, running counter to Yang's entrepreneurial message. Yang himself disputed the numbers the New York Times came out with and said he's proud of Venture for America, which was praised by the Obama administration. Some concern was raised about Yang's lobbyist/campaign manager Bradley Tusk's conflicts of interest, pointing to Tusk's ownership of numerous businesses and could potentially profit from his client's victory to City Hall. Tusk wrote in a post published on Medium that he would keep his distance from Yang if he ends up winning. Yang separately came out with a new policy idea to increase real estate taxes on land kept vacant, hoping to generate about $900 million and blaming the Department of Finance for undervaluing the vacant lots, saying that's why landowners aren't developing them. Despite losing a lot of endorsements following his sexual assault allegation, Comptroller Scott Stringer is clearly moving forward with his mayoral run, having visited churches on the campaign trail at the beginning of the week and picking up the endorsement of labor union Teamsters Local 237, representing 24,000 school safety officers and NYCHA maintenance workers. Stringer's accuser, Gene Kim, filed a formal complaint with Attorney General Tish James's office this week. A report by The Intercept made a deep dive on Kim's claim, showing that Kim knew Stringer far longer than she publicly claimed, and providing proof that Kim petitioned for Yang's campaign and held some sort of relationship with Stringer. The comptroller urged an investigation into Kim's claims and said that he couldn't remember the first time he met her in response to questions by Brian Lehrer. A New York Post report focused on Eric Adams' campaign expenditure showed that Adams paid a company called KA Strategies $30,000, but the same filing curiously included payment to a woman named Christina Koval, referring to KA Strategies founder Christina Kovalyuk, who was arrested for selling fake handbags, but her charges were later dropped. Adams' campaign spokesman Evan Thies declined to comment. In the Manhattan DA's race, the candidates for Manhattan DA took part in a debate, including civil rights lawyer Tahani Abushi, criminal defense attorney Liz Crotty, and former prosecutors Alvin Bragg, Lucy Lang, Diana Florence, and Farhadian Weinstein, moderated by journalist Errol Lewis. The debate saw a heated discussion about how to tackle gun violence in Manhattan, which crimes a new DA wouldn't prosecute, and protracted hits against Bragg and Weinstein, seen as frontrunners in the race. And in the race for Brooklyn Borough President to replace Eric Adams, whether or not he wins the mayoral race, two Brooklyn councilmen, Robert Corneghi Jr. and Antonio Reynoso, are running neck and neck according to a new poll released by Bennington Strategy Group, showing that Corneghi and Reynoso would be the first choice on ranked choice voting ballots for a plurality of 20% of voters each, with Joanne Simon coming third at 17%. The Department of Education released the new school year's calendar, revealing no more snow days, with any days that schools are snowed in would be replaced by remote learning. Additionally, Columbus Day was eliminated as a day on the calendar, replaced by a joint Italian Heritage and Indigenous Peoples Day. De Blasio curiously said that he didn't sign off on the idea, subtly hinting that preceding school's chancellor Richard Carranza put it in place.
I wanted to ask you about the Department of Education changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, and when the decision was made to add Italian Heritage Day to Indigenous Peoples Day on the calendar. And can we get your feelings as an Italian American on erasing Christopher Columbus's name from the calendar? We heard from a lot of elected officials who say that it's an affront and they're angry about it.
Look, I think this process wasn't handled right. I certainly didn't hear about the change, nor did the chancellor, so we spoke about it and we both agreed this was not the right way to handle things.
The mayor also said that the city's school system would be fully reopened this upcoming fall, but there are still parents that want to know whether there will be an option to be fully virtual, but they won't find a clear answer to that question just yet, as both de Blasio and Chancellor Ross Porter are dodging those inquiries. Accessorides always had a reputation for being unreliable, as disabled individuals hang hopes on drivers in order to get around the city. But as the pandemic recedes here in the city, riders are saying that Accessoride is even more unreliable than usual, with the MTA saying there are a lack of available cabs and drivers. The NYPD released new data showing the increased number of hate crimes in the city revolving around attacks against Asians and Jews. From January 1st to April 4th, 80 hate crimes were reported against Asians, compared to 16 during that time last year, while from January 1st to May 2nd, there were 54 hate crimes against Jews, down slightly from 58 during that time last year. In total, there is a 73% increase in hate crimes during this period compared to last year. A coalition of public defender groups and wrongful conviction organizations sent a letter to all 5 borough district attorneys pointing out 22 city cops whose misconduct should result in dismissing convictions of defendants where those cops' testimonies were key to convictions. All DA offices are saying they are reviewing the letter. The journalistic organization The City released a report finding that the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is supposed to watch over the NYPD and investigate claims of misconduct, regularly overrides their own staff's investigative findings, known as flipping cases, having overturned 505 allegations in 6 years, flipping 11.6% of findings, but substantiating over 5,100 misconduct allegations over that time period. Data released by Transportation Alternatives shows that pedestrian fatalities increased by 65% in the first 4 months of 2021, the highest pedestrian death toll since de Blasio introduced his Vision Zero plan to get rid of all pedestrian deaths by 2024, which has had mixed results and reactions. The MTA's labor union is warning that with the resumption of 24/7 train service, there could be a grime wave due to the shortage of cleaners for the early hours and an expiration with private companies disinfecting subway cars on July 1st. The Howard Hughes Corporation won its third chance to develop a tower at the South Street Seaport Historic District from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, with the development corporation settling for a smaller version of their plans for a new building at the Eastern Coastal Tourist Spot. The Rent Guidelines Board, responsible for deciding how rent-stabilized rents increase or not, signaled that they are going to continue their rent freeze for those apartments this week, evidenced by a 5-4 vote on the board to keep 1-year leases the same rent-wise, with 2-year leases being allowed to increase in rent by landowners. Over at the City Council, the Council passed a right to counsel law at the end of last week that would expand the right for low-income tenants to be represented in housing court for free. An earlier law only tailored the right to certain zip codes, but now it applies citywide. Councilman Rafael Salamanca introduced a bill this week asking the City Board of Elections to report wait times at the busiest polling places for future elections, attempting to counter complaints of long lines that inevitably spring up every election. Over at the Cuomo administration, more restrictions were lifted this week. New York City subway is going to be 24/7 again after closing in the early hours for deep cleaning starting May 17th, Cuomo announced. Didn't help that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that the trains, quote, must resume full-time operation.
We can see light at the end of the tunnel, including the subway tunnel. We're a city that never sleeps. If you shut down the subway, you shut down a part of our city. And we can restore it and should restore it now. Newsflash, this is New York City. People work at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. That's how we are.
Cuomo announced that along with New Jersey and Connecticut, many businesses can fully reopen starting May 9th, looking to jumpstart the tri-state economy that took a major hit during the pandemic. The reopenings would include restaurants, offices, retail stores, theaters, museums, salons, amusement parks, and gyms.
Wednesday, May 19th, most capacity restrictions will end across the tri-state area. That includes retail stores, food services, gyms, fitness centers, amusement and family entertainment, hair salons, barbershops, offices, etc. No capacity restrictions on all of those activities.
The state's positive rate this past weekend was below 1.49% for the first time since October, decreasing consistently since April and a positive sign for the state's recovery. 46.5% of New Yorkers have received at least one shot and 35% are fully vaccinated. Overtime increased 5.5% in state agencies attributable to working to assist New Yorkers during the pandemic, especially in the Department of Labor, which handled unemployment applications. 15 workers clocked in more than $150,000 in overtime last year alone. The governor said this week that Yankee Stadium in the Met City Field is going to reopen fully to vaccinated fans and is incentivizing vaccinations for those who haven't gotten their shots yet, with free tickets and a chance to get vaccinated at the stadiums themselves. The Wall Street Journal profiled who was still supporting Cuomo in the midst of his scandals, including a group called Women for Governor Cuomo, comprising 1,100 women over the age of 55 who tried getting other Facebook groups together to strategize support for Cuomo. Continuing the Republican jockeying for who's going to face either Cuomo or a generic Democrat for New York governor next year, Rudy Giuliani's son, Andrew Giuliani, said that he's going to make a decision in the coming days about whether he is going to jump into the race for governor. A preliminary State Education Department digital equity survey revealed that Black and Latino students in the top 5 school districts in the state, including New York City, Buffalo, Yonkers, Syracuse, and Rochester, are 4 times likely to not to have access to adequate internet and 3 times less likely to have a device connected to the internet compared to school districts with majority white students. Westchester District Attorney Mimi Rocha asked the Department of Justice to launch investigations into the Mount Vernon Police Department for patterns of unlawful conduct, including use of force, strip searches, and more. Rocha is leading her own investigation. Despite the NYPD saying that crime is down in city subways, Cuomo was saying that he wants to see more cops in the subways because he wouldn't even send his own kids to ride the train. That's how dangerous it is. Cuomo continued his crusade against the MTA's safety in the subways, blaming Mayor de Blasio this week with creating a culture allowing homeless people to stay in the subways and making things even worse in the subway system than in the 70s. Attorney General Letitia James released a report finding that almost 82% of the 22 million comments on the FCC's website about net neutrality rules concerning the ability for internet service providers to block access to certain websites in exchange for money were fake, with millions of comments funded by the broadband industry. Cuomo signed the legislature's bill to restore felons' right to vote after being released, solidifying an original executive order by the governor that he signed in 2018. Parolees receive a voter registration form now once they're released from prison. The governor also signed a bill mandating that employers protect their employees from airborne diseases, seeking to guarantee workplace protections from diseases that spread through the air like COVID. State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli is on a roll with criticizing the state, pointing out that the Port Authority didn't collect $8.3 million in rent, saying it was because of a bunch of inefficiencies. Over at the state legislature, the legislature passed an extension to the state's eviction moratorium, preventing landlords from kicking out tenants due to lack of paying rent during the pandemic until August 31st. The bill also provides rental assistance to tenants trying to make ends meet and who cannot pay rent due to job losses caused by the pandemic. Tenants will first have to file what's called a hardship declaration in order to qualify for aid. Roanne DeStito, the commissioner of the Office of General Services, sent a letter responding to Senate and Assembly Minority Leaders Robert Ortt and Will Barclay, respectively, outlining how the state capitol is going to reopen after being closed after the pandemic killed tourist visits and the January 6th insurrection in D.C. increased security. The letter didn't reveal much, just that DeStito's office was reviewing the public health and safety requirements for the Capitol building. Convicted corrupt former Assembly member William Boylan Jr. was moved to home confinement in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn in February, 6 years into his 14-year sentence. Boylan filed for compassionate release, and federal prosecutors are rejecting the request. Another convicted politician that was temporarily moved to home confinement 8 months into his sentence, Sheldon Silver, the former Assembly Speaker. Silver was convicted of corruption for taking bribes and kickbacks from his law firm clients. Silver was moved back to prison after the DOJ rejected a compassionate release request by Silver's lawyers. The state legislature passed a couple of bills that tell nursing homes and hospitals the staffing levels required under law and established a minimum of 3.5 hours with every patient. The state Senate passed a bill this week that prohibits pet stores in the state from selling cats, dogs, and rabbits due to reports of horrible living conditions and animal abuse, colloquially called puppy mills. The state found that pet retail stores make most of their money from merchandising and that there are more than enough individual breeders and rescue shelters that consumers can get their pets from. If the bill passes, pet stores can still showcase pets for adoptions, but only from nonprofit organizations. The husband of Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie's chief of staff, Orlando Dennis, was sentenced 76 months in prison this week for drug trafficking and was ordered to pay the IRS back $136,000 for tax evasion. Giovanni Brooks Dennis, Heastie's chief of staff, wrote a letter requesting leniency from the judge. Over at the state judiciary, following the state's impending reopening, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals Janet DiFiore said that all judges and staff are expected to go back to work inside their chambers by May 24th. Republican Assemblyman Mike Lawler from Pearl River is thinking about splitting the 9th Judicial District and creating a new judicial district by separating Westchester County from Dutchess, Orange, Putnam, and Rockland counties. Lawler introduced his bill earlier this week. A new state report shows that New York's judiciary is remarkably undiverse, with almost 70% of judges being white and only 14% being black. Advocates say increasing the diversity of the bench can help the justice system see the plight of minorities more empathetically. Albany State Supreme Court Justice Scott Del Conte dismissed the Albany Republican Party's attempts to get rid of the Working Family Party's list of Democratic endorsements in the county, saying the party didn't have a compelling reason to justify throwing out the slate of candidates and that the Working Families Party followed election law when it came to how it gathered electronic signatures. Justices in Saratoga and Colony counties dismissed similar Republican challenges. Lawyers careful about poaching those clients. The First Department Appellate Division green-lighted a New Jersey law firm's claim against city firms on client poaching claims, saying the firm Gennardi, Gallardo, Gonzalez, and Winograd has valid tortious interference claims against William Schwitzer and Associates and others to the tune of $30 million. The firms poach clients through tactics such as paying for Uber rides from doctors' offices with the enticement of a briefcase filled with $3,000 inside. After Judge Arthur Engoron refused to issue a temporary restraining order against the City Planning Commission to rezone the Soho and NoHo neighborhoods in Manhattan, the commission can technically move forward with the rezoning despite the lawsuit not being over, but has decided to hold off on certifying the land use review procedure application for now. Resident groups sued the city to stop the rezoning, claiming that the commission wasn't following the law by not holding meetings in person. The Court of Appeals ruled that planned snowmobile tracks in the Adirondacks can't move forward because it violates the, quote, forever wild clause in the New York State Constitution, and that if the state wants to move forward on the idea, they have to amend it. The group suing against the plan, Protect the Adirondacks, celebrated a win after 8 years of litigation against the Department of Environmental Conservation. 2 judges dissented, including Chief Judge Danny DiFiore. The Court of Appeals also ruled in a case allowing a police officer's translation of a witness's statement to be used in a pleading, reversing a lower appeal court decision requiring a certificate of translation to get around hearsay objections. The City Department of Transportation filed a lawsuit against e-bike startup Joco in Manhattan Supreme Court, saying the company refused to comply with a cease and desist order to stop implementing its business plan to rival Citi Bike. Joco set up 30 docking stations on private properties in Manhattan and says that's the reason why it's allowed to pursue its business plan. Manhattan Judge Carol Edmeade dismissed the lawsuit filed filed by 6 council members seeking to prohibit ranked choice voting from going into effect for the upcoming city elections, saying that the council members waited too long to file the suit and earlier special elections were allowed to go through with the ranked choice voting model, and they turned out completely fine. Over at the Biden administration, Biden said this week that the nation will be in a different position by the summer regarding the U.S.'s fight against COVID, saying Americans should go and get vaccinated despite fears of the country not reaching herd immunity. The CDC is projecting a sharp decline in COVID cases by July as long as vaccination rates remain high.
I think by the end of the summer, we'll be in a very different position than we are now. As you know, I've worked very hard to make sure we have over 600 million doses of vaccine. We're going to continue to make sure that's available. We're going to increase that number across the board as well, so we can also be helping other nations once we take care of all Americans.
The FDA is authorizing Pfizer's vaccine for kids 12 to 15 years after clinical trial results show the vaccine's efficacy in that age group. If the FDA authorizes the vaccine for that age group, schools can reopen a lot faster. The pharmaceutical company will also be looking for FDA approval for its vaccine amongst ages 2 to 11 in September. The Biden administration released new plans for vaccines that are going unused in certain states, telling the states that they can either use the vaccines or give them up so that other states that are more in need can use them instead. The president also put in place a new target for the nation's vaccination, seeking to inoculate 70% of American adults with at least one shot by July 4th. The president also directed pharmacies across the country administering vaccines to make themselves available for walk-ins to the extent that they could.
Our goal by July 4th is to have 70% of adult Americans with at least one shot and 160 million Americans fully vaccinated. That means giving close to 100 million shots, some first shots, others second shots, over the next 60 days. Of course, Americans can still get shots after July 4th, but no one should wait, and let's try to hit that 70% mark, at least with one shot before that day.
Addressing another criticism of the Biden administration, the president stuck to his campaign promise and said that he supports waiving COVID vaccine patents in order to let countries mass-produce vaccines faster to address their outbreaks. India, for instance, has faced upwards of 350,000 infections daily and is home to factories producing mass quantities of the world's vaccines, but because of patent restrictions, is not allowed to produce the vaccines for themselves. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai said extraordinary circumstances called for extraordinary measures. Germany publicly came out against the U.S.'s plans to waive patent protections for the vaccines, saying that waiving those restrictions would stifle innovation and wouldn't provide immediate relief to countries like India, which are experiencing disastrous waves of COVID. Pfizer asked the FDA to grant its vaccine full approval, which would make it become the first vaccine to move out of emergency use. Currently, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson are approved for emergency use only in the United States. According to data released this week by the Department of Health and Human Services, about 940,000 Americans enrolled in health insurance coverage through the Affordable Act exchanges during a special enrollment period in the first 10 weeks of Biden's presidency. The Kaiser Family Foundation reported that 4 million Americans would be able to sign up for plans that wouldn't require a premium due to their poverty level. Biden invited Republicans over to the White House again this week to discuss a compromise for his infrastructure proposal after Republicans revealed a nearly $600 billion counterproposal to Biden's $2.3 trillion plan. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell only emphasized the Republicans' position this week by saying that no Senate Republican would support a plan costing $4 trillion, probably referring to Biden's American Family Plan as well. Congress is going to wrangle over earmarks this week, which are pet projects for individual congressional districts included in a bill, which is one way to incentivize a Congress member to vote for a bill. In the meantime, Biden traveled to Louisiana to promote his infrastructure proposal. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sought to downplay inflation concerns regarding Biden's plan by saying that the plan is spread out evenly over 8 to 10 years, making inflation a non-issue. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said that the Biden administration is reuniting 4 migrant families that were separated under the Trump administration. The former president's immigration strategy included separating kids from their parents, and in some cases the parents were deported without the kids, leading to scramble to reunite the families after groups like the ACLU sued the White House. Biden created a task force specifically to reunite those families after his inauguration, with the head of the task force, Michelle Brunei, saying there are still more than 1,000 families left to reunite. The Biden administration formally raised the refugee cap to 62,500, up from the 15,000 left over by the Trump administration. Biden wanted to keep the 15,000 number as a deterrent against the current migrant surge at the southern border, but liberal allies quickly rose up in a firestorm. Vice President Kamala Harris announced that her first international meeting will take place in Mexico and Guatemala on June 7th and 8th, meeting the two countries' representatives to figure out a solution to reduce the number of migrants approaching the U.S. southern border. President Biden entrusted the mission to reduce the number of migrants coming to the border in the future to the vice president. The Department of Health and Human Services have awarded 2 private and 1 nonprofit Infant Shelter Organization $2 billion in government contracts as the migrant surge at the southern border continues, exempting staffing requirements in order to remove government red tape. Environmental Protection Agency Secretary Michael Regan is moving forward with a new regulation targeting hydrofluorocarbon production and importation, chemicals found primarily in refrigerators and air conditioners, with the goal of reducing them by 85% over 15 years. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration revealed new climate averages for the contiguous U.S., which is all 48 states, save Alaska and Hawaii, showing that over the 30-year period from 1991 to 2020, the average temperature went up to 53 degrees, having warmed 1.7 degrees since temperatures were recorded in 1901. The warming of the climate is a byproduct of climate change, melting ice caps and rising sea levels, which could lead to more coastal erosion and environmental degradation. The number of unemployment claims continued to fall, this time falling to 498,000 last week for the first time since the pandemic. While hiring may be increasing throughout the country, many employers are facing scenarios where workers aren't agreeing to work for wages set since before the pandemic. This was evidenced this week by the U.S.'s unemployment rate and hiring numbers being released, showing a massive disconnect between what economists projected and how many workers were hired, with the unemployment rate ticking up to 6.1% due to millions of workers re-entering the workforce looking for work, but with employers only hiring a little more than 266,000 workers because employees are refusing to come back to work for the same benefits and wages. Fear of contracting COVID, lack of childcare, and unemployment benefits were also blamed as reasons for why hiring numbers are not higher. Biden commented on the disappointing jobs numbers, saying that it's going to take more time for the economy to recover.
But look, it's also going to take focus, commitment, and time to get the economy moving again, as we want it to move. We've got work to do, to state the obvious, we have work to do.
The Department of Labor rescinded a Trump-era rule that defined Uber and Lyft drivers, as well as other gig workers in the same vein, as contractors rather than regular employees under federal law, which benefited app companies because they wouldn't have to pay for traditional employee benefits. Gig workers can now be covered under minimum wage and overtime laws. The Federal Election Commission sent a request to Congress to ban the practice of pre-checked recurring donation boxes and fundraising appeals by politicians and political action committees, stemming from a New York Times investigation on Trump's PACs having to return more than $100 million in donations because donors were unaware that they were sending recurring donations. The FEC also made waves by declining to investigate Trump's hush money payments to keep the porn star Stormy Daniels quiet about their affair during the 2016 presidential election. The episode is why Trump's former personal lawyer Michael Cohen was imprisoned, as he admitted to paying Stormy Daniels $130,000 as well as arranging a payment to Playboy star Karen McDougal through American Media Inc. The Republican and Democratic commissioners on the FEC were deadlocked, which is why the agency is declining to move forward on the case, as the Democrats say there's enough to prove there was a violation of federal law, while Republicans say it wouldn't be a good use of the agency's resources, the public record was complete, and a punishment was already doled out through Michael Cohen. A week after the Supreme Court decided to take on a case looking into whether Guantanamo Bay detainee Abu Zubaydah can subpoena the CIA for information about black site locations Zubaydah was tortured in, the Biden administration filed a petition with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention to release Zubaydah. The CIA captured Zubaydah 19 years ago thinking he was a senior al-Qaeda operative, but reversed their assessment after torturing him. The US's top general Mark Milley has dropped his opposition to the military's sexual assault policy, keeping determinations about sexual assault inside the brass, saying that he's open now to taking sexual assault prosecutions out of commanders' hands and give it to an independent review panel that would be led by civilian leaders. Biden tapped former Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Director Richard Cordray to lead the Student Aid Office in the Department of Education. Cordray hasn't come out with a public position on Biden potentially canceling a minimum of $10,000 in student loan debt, but Cordray is an ally of Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is in favor of canceling more student debt than that. Secretary of State Antony Blinken went abroad to the UK for his first multilateral in-person meeting at the G7 summit, the group of 7 industrial nations consisting of the US, Japan, Germany, France, the UK, Italy, and Canada. Blinken is expected to meet on the side with the Japanese and South Korean ministers as the two Asian countries try to repair their ties. The G7 ended their meeting with a statement warning against the rise of China and Russia's militaristic international stance undermining the West. Blinken told 60 Minutes that China is acting more repressively at home and more aggressively abroad, underlining the challenge the U.S. has with a rising China. Blinken is set to debate with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the UN Security Council about the future of countries charting democratic paths for their models of governance. In the midst of restarted talks in Vienna to get the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table for the Iranian nuclear deal, the U.S. denied Iranian reports this week of a prisoner swap between the two countries. Iranian state TV made the claim that the U.S. was giving Iran $7 billion in exchange for 4 imprisoned U.S. spies. Seeking to allay concerns about how the Taliban is going to act as U.S. troops withdraw from Afghanistan, Biden said that the military will work to disrupt any terrorist threats coming out of the region during troop withdrawal. Concerns mostly regard what will happen to Afghan forces once the U.S. is out of the country. The Biden administration is set to announce the president's nominee to be the ambassador to Israel, with former Clinton and Obama official Tom Nides sides being the likely pick. Despite withdrawing some forces away from the Ukrainian border, Russia is still maintaining a sizable troop presence in the area, alarming U.S. officials, leading some sources to tell the Wall Street Journal that the troops are still a threat. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Ukraine this week in a show of support. Blinken said this week that the U.S. is considering additional military aid for Ukraine, including giving the country air defense systems and technology buffering snipers. Over at Congress, months out from the insurrection, people are still getting arrested for their part in the attempted sabotage of Biden's Electoral College certification. Wisconsin National Guard soldier Abram Markovsky was arrested and charged with 4 criminal counts this week. 41 veterans were charged as part of the riots, with the military cracking down on extremists under Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The FBI is still hunting down those who broke into the Capitol, with one source telling NBC that they're not done rounding up the worst of the worst. 3 states make up the majority of those rounded up: Texas, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Over at the House, Democrats' hopes were dashed when 2 Republicans advanced to a runoff in the Texas district vacated by the COVID-caused death of Representative Ron Wright. Wright's widow, Susan Wright, is going up against fellow Republican Jake Ellzey. The number 3 Republican in the House, Liz Cheney, continues to make waves for her anti-Trump comments, saying at a recent event this week that Republicans can't, quote, whitewash what Trump did on the January 6th insurrection against Congress. Her comments and pattern of making anti-Trump statements has upset Republicans to the point that there are active talks to remove Cheney from the House Republican leadership. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was caught on a hot mic saying that he's had it with Cheney. McCarthy ended up saying on Fox News that the Republican House leadership lost confidence in Cheney, and it is all but assured that Cheney will be kicked off as conference chair. Trump and the number 2 Republican, Steve Scalise, endorsed New York Upstate Republican Elise Stefanik to become the next conference chair, as she became a huge Trump defender since the president's first impeachment, although not every MAGA supporter likes Stefanik, as she has a worse record voting with the former president than even Cheney. Cheney, for her part, isn't objecting to her ouster, saying it's not worth holding on to her position if it means lying about the election being rigged against Trump, and released an op-ed where she decried the Republican Party's, quote, Trump cult of personality. Over at the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is getting ready to go it alone on immigration without Republican support if bipartisan talks stall, telling members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus privately that he is looking into the budget reconciliation progress to pass a bill with a simple majority vote, the same way COVID relief was passed. It's not clear whether that procedural move would apply to immigration since it's not related to the budget. The move would certainly enrage Republicans, and Democrats are looking to see how serious Republicans are in negotiations. Republican Senator Josh Hawley, who was one of the senators to oppose Biden's Electoral College certification, said that he doesn't regret raising his fist in front of Trump supporters shortly before they ransacked the Capitol, saying that Trump supporters had a right to be there and he didn't know for sure which demonstrators broke into the Capitol, refusing to generalize the crowd. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell may be the universally hated figure from the liberal point of view, but according to a morning consult poll, 42% of Republican voters hold favorable views of the Minority Leader from Kentucky, with his unfavorables falling 13 points to 36%. Responding to questions about Trump's insults against him, McConnell said that he's only looking forward, not backward, and that he's focused on 100% standing up to the Biden administration and stopping him. Over at the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court dismissed a request to hear a case from a female West Point military cadet who said she was raped at the academy in 2010, saying court precedent from 1950 prohibits military personnel from suing the government for injuries, quote, incident to their service. Notably, conservative Justice Clarence Thomas dissented from the court's dismissal, saying the court should have given Jane Doe's case a chance. The court also refused to hear a case about bump stocks, an attachment that can make a gun fire faster. Maryland banned bump stocks and other gun modifications in 2018, with lower courts dismissing challenges to the bans and upholding those dismissals. Maryland and other states rushed to ban the add-ons after the 2017 Las Vegas shooting. Deceased infamous Wall Street fraudster Bernie Madoff may be dead, but the cases revolving around those trying to recover their funds has not. The Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal by those who profited off of Madoff's pyramid investment scheme, upholding efforts by a trustee set up to claw back almost $41 million from the ones that got lucky from the scheme. The Supreme Court heard arguments on Tuesday in a case about disparities in crack cocaine sentencing between those caught with the hard or powdered forms. The plaintiff, Tararik Terry, was sentenced to 15.5 years in 2008 for possession of less than 4 grams of crack. The Second Circuit agreed to stay an earlier ruling upholding convictions of 2 NCAA basketball marketers and an agent for paying college basketball students under the table to sponsor Adidas products because the defendants appealed to the Supreme Court. New York Attorney General Letitia James made her closing argument in Texas bankruptcy court, asking the judge there to dismiss the NRA's attempt to file for bankruptcy in that state, with James saying it's just an attempt to run away from a lawsuit in New York that looked into the organization's fraud, and on top of that, the NRA doesn't even have any financial reasons for filing for bankruptcy, according to the New York Attorney General. D.C. District Judge Amy Bernin Jackson, known for her earlier presiding over the Roger Stone criminal case, ordered the release of a Department of Justice memo that justified not prosecuting former President Trump for obstruction of justice related to the special counsel Mueller investigation into Russian interference into the 2016 election. Judge Jackson called former Attorney General under Trump Bill Barr disingenuous for his earlier arguments and called out the Department of Justice for doing the same thing. The Department of Justice argued that release of the memo violated attorney-client privilege, which Judge Jackson disagreed with based on her own review of the 41-page memo. D.C. District Judge Dabney Friedrich, appointed by Trump, struck down a nationwide eviction freeze by the CDC, which the agency relied on a Public Health Act to authorize eviction freezes during public health emergencies, giving a victory to realtors and landlords. Judge Friedrich simply said that the statute didn't give the CDC the authority to institute a nationwide eviction moratorium, which the DOJ said is reviewing the ruling. Judge Friedrich then agreed to stay her ruling as the DOJ requested so they can prepare their appeal. Over in national news, public health experts in the U.S. believe that reaching herd immunity in the country is now just a pipe dream, with daily vaccination rates dropping, making passing the threshold for immunity nearly impossible, resigning to a future where COVID hospitalizations and deaths continue but in manageable numbers as long as the country stays on top of mutations. Another challenge is how rural places can increase their rates of vaccination, with even hospital staff in some rural areas only 50% vaccinated. States continue to handle the virus in their own way, with conservative governors like Ron DeSantis from Florida pulling the plug completely all at once. The Florida governor suspended all local COVID ordinances and got rid of all restrictions, and if a local municipality wants to put restrictions back in place, they can only do it 1 week at a time at a maximum of 6 weeks, with the state reserving the right to preempt the local government. Former Republican turned Democrat Charlie Crist announced that he's going to challenge DeSantis for the governor's seat, crafting a message that the state's Republicans and DeSantis don't care about Floridians. Pfizer is one of the pharmaceutical companies that decided to reap profits off of the pandemic after creating their vaccine, revealing that for the first 3 months of 2021, they made about $3.5 billion. Moderna, meanwhile, said that its booster shots are showing promising preliminary results against mutated variants in a recent study. The vaccine pharmaceutical companies are steadily increasing messaging revolving around the need for booster shots against COVID 6 months to a year after being inoculated. Moderna also saw its first profit since releasing their vaccine, making nearly $1.75 billion in the first 3 months of 2021. Then Moderna released preliminary data later in the week showing its vaccine as being 96% effective in adolescents between 12 and 17 years old. A poll published in the Kaiser Family Foundation's Vaccine Monitor shows that parents are reluctant to get their kids immunized as vaccines become readily available for young children and teens. 26% of parents said they wanted to wait and see how the vaccines take their course before getting their kids vaccinated. 18% say they would only get their kid vaccinated if their schools required it, and 23% said they definitely won't have their kids take a shot. The census, apart from revealing which states lost and gained population numbers, revealed information about the country's birth rate, showing that the U.S.'s birth rate declined for the 6th straight year, with 2020 showing a negative 4% decline. An ABC Ipsos poll this week showed that Americans are the most optimistic since 2006 about the future of the nation, with 64% saying they like the way things are heading in the country, with only 23% saying they think the country is more united under Biden than Trump. 28% say the country is more divided. Facebook's oversight board, created to answer tough questions related to figuring what aspects of the site to block or allow, decided that when it comes to former President Trump's banning off the platform following the January 6th insurrection, the social media site was correct about kicking Trump off, but wasn't correct about there being an indefinite ban. The board said that Facebook has 6 months to decide how long it wants to keep the former president off the platform. Meanwhile, Trump created his own website this week, saying it was a platform to just communicate his thoughts, but wasn't the Twitter-like social media platform he promised, since his fans couldn't post comments or like his postings. Twitter continues to say they are permanently banning the president on their platform, and even banned the Trump blog account for trying to get around Twitter's ban on the former president. Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is continuing to deny charges that he was acting as an illegal foreign lobbyist for his Ukrainian allies while trying to find dirt on Biden when he was still running for president in 2019 and 2020. A New York Times report cites sources that saying that Giuliani's own legal counsel is trying to get Trump to pay for some of Giuliani's legal bills, as he's facing a prosecution from the Department of Justice and defamation lawsuits from Dominion and Smartmatic for allegedly lying about election fraud. Prosecutors requested the appointment of a special master to review Giuliani's seized electronic devices for attorney-client material. A funeral was held this week for Andrew Brown Jr., a black man who was shot in the back by police after serving a search and arrest warrant. An autopsy funded by Brown's family showed police shot Brown in the back of the head. Former police officer Derek Chauvin, who was recently convicted of the murder of George Floyd, appealed his conviction and asked for a new trial, alleging jury misconduct due to all of the publicity of the case before the original trial started, and that the judge erroneously denied a change in the venue. There were 6 other allegations, with the move being widely expected. Chauvin and 3 other officers that were present on the day of Floyd's murder were also indicted by a federal grand jury on civil rights charges, potentially setting up another high-profile trial. Republican moves to suppress the use of mail-in voting and other voting methods under the guise of election integrity following the lie from former President Trump that the 2020 presidential election was rigged against him continues. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division sent a letter to the Republican president of the Arizona Senate, Karen Fann, expressing concern over sending ballots from battleground Maricopa County to a private contractor for a recount, saying that the private contractor's practice of contacting individual voters can amount to voter intimidation and violates a law requiring ballots to remain in the hands of the local election officials. Meanwhile, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill bill largely cast as a voter suppression bill by the media, as it reduces voting by mail and the ability to leave ballots at drop boxes, as well as empowering so-called poll watchers, which election officials say will interfere in the process of vote counting. DeSantis signed the bill in a ceremony that curiously left out all news media except Fox News. The law was almost immediately hit with a couple of lawsuits from the League of Women Voters of Florida, the Black Voters Matter Fund, and the Florida Alliance for Retired Americans in one lawsuit, and the other lawsuit from the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Disability Rights Florida, and Common Cause, alleging that the law disenfranchises black voters. Texas is next on the list of Republican-led states taking aim at voting, with lawmakers passing a measure that would increase criminal penalties on voting infractions, eliminate drive-by voting, reduce early voting hours, and give poll watchers the right to photograph ballot counters. Verizon announced it sold Yahoo and AOL to Apollo Global Management, a private equity firm, for $5 billion this week. In a surprise move, Microsoft founder Bill Gates and his wife Melinda announced a divorce after 27 years, saying that they would like privacy and that they will continue to work together on their charity, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And lastly, after initially pushing back against claims of unsafe treadmills sold by Peloton, the company is now voluntarily recalling its treadmill machines because of the death of a child and numerous injuries to other children. Peloton CEO John Foley apologized to the Consumer Product Safety Commission for not pulling back its products earlier. And that's it for this week's show of the 25th Hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month to support the show at patreon.com/the25thhournews. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.